You're listening to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast.
Well, for as long as I've been doing this podcast, it has been one of my biggest goals to be able to welcome this week's guest. He is the grandfather of computer role-playing games, the grandfather of the modern MMO game, creator of the Ultima series and Origin systems. He's visited the Titanic, he's been to outer space, and of course he is one of my personal heroes. Welcome to the show, Lord British Richard Garriott.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a very kind intro. I appreciate it.
It is just such a huge honor and privilege to be talking to you today.
Oh, thanks.
Unfortunately, my co-host Paul could not be here today. Some unfortunate personal circumstances, of which the details I will not go into, prevented him from being able to make it. But he does send his regards as a fan of yours as well.
Great, thank you.
To start off, I did finish reading Explore Create, your autobiography, just this past summer. It is a great read. I absolutely recommend it to anyone who is a fan of yours. Anyone who's listening to this should definitely go out and read that book. And as such, we're not going to retread too much of what's covered in there. But a few questions did arise as I was reading it. Number one, do your dinner parties always come with the possibility of death or dismemberment?
Funny way to phrase that. But well, it is interesting. I just had a dinner party the other day, and absolutely, one of my goals through my dinner parties is to turn it up a notch and make sure that there are activities to be had that are well outside their traditional. But as you have noted, they do often include hazards that you wouldn't normally expect at a dinner party. It's interesting. That reminds me of a story that's not in the book. But we were doing a political fundraiser in the last election cycle, and because of the candidate who was coming by, the Secret Service came through my house and saw all the crossbows and swords and wheel-lock pistols and rifles and things mounted all over the walls. And they walked in, they were like, well, most all this is going to have to come down. And so we literally had to, spend a few hours removing all of the weaponry from the walls of the main floor. Interestingly, the two things they left up were the wheel-lock pistol and the wheel-lock rifle. They were not only mounted up high enough they would be difficult to grab, but they figured correctly that those would also be a little bit hard to load and fire with any real sense of urgency. Mm-hmm. And so all the rest of the equipment that got piled in the master bedroom in a lump prior to our event.
I love that it requires hours to take down all of the weapons from your home. Now, one game I really want to talk about, which I don't think was talked about very much at length in your book, is Ultima 7, because that is probably my single favorite game of all time. It is just... I started the series at Ultima 6, which was already just like such a huge and amazing game, and then just the jump from Ultima 6 to Ultima 7 was not even like a logical step up. It was just like leaps and bounds beyond. It was like really mind-blowing when I first turned on Ultima 7 and came to the first game screen and just saw like just how much of a step up it was. And there's a lot of people who share my opinion that it is the peak and pinnacle of computer role-playing games. When you consider the scope of the game at the time that it came out, there's really hasn't been very many games that can compare to the impact that Ultima 7 had. So I guess my question is, like, is there anything about Ultima 7 that you would have wanted to do differently, or is there anything that you wanted to put in that you weren't able to at that time?
It's interesting you point to Ultima 7 as the sort of the pinnacle of the series and or even more broadly role-playing games. I feel very similarly about Ultima 7. And what's interesting about that is that I don't think any less effort was put into trying to maximize the forward progress in any of the Ultimas before or after. Mm-hmm. But there was something very magical about Ultima 7 that really had to do with the team that came together to create it. That team, it was very obvious early in the project that the people that came together to build the game, without regard to whether the person building the pop-up windowing infrastructure or the person building how tiles would no longer be restricted to a little, rectangular area, but we could, make wagons that would move by kind of adding them together in pieces that could move around the world. Every aspect of that game, the specialist who was in charge of kind of pushing that part of the game forward were so incredibly talented, and everyone was so devoted to it. I mean, it was the pinnacle of Origin as a lifestyle. We all came together with this, shared ideal to really make this amazing game. Everybody worked very hard at it. Everyone was, greatly appreciative of each other's work and greatly added to each other's work. So, I mean, it was obvious what was happening during the creation process too, and so no surprise it came out quite well.
And whereabouts did Ultima 7 come in the scheme of when Origin was being bought out by EA? Already as early as Ultima 7, there were references to EA for like in Elizabeth and Abraham and the
Sphere of the Cube and the Tetrahedron.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so it's important to know the sort of the history of that. Of both what became the storyline of Ultima 7 and then also our kind of off and on relationship with Electronic Arts. For those who don't know the history, earlier in Origin history, we'd actually distributed through Electronic Arts. And we had a falling out with EA where they started publishing games that were literally copyright infringement on Ultima, meaning literally people had stolen the random green dot pattern of grass and put it in their own game. So things that we were literally showing them precise copyright infringement. And not only did EA kind of fight through and kind of push us around like, hey, you can't stop us from publishing competitive games, which wasn't, in my mind, the point.
Yeah.
But even though we did get out of that distribution contract, they actually sued us. We actually ended up paying them money to settle out of court, just kind of wind up the stuff with EA. So that's why we had this sort of, that's why EA became the punching bag in a lot of Ultima stories, especially with Ultima 7. Interestingly, the person with which we had that falling out, the primary instigator, had left EA since those early days. And so as we were looking again to fight for shelf space during the retail era, and we were looking at partners and began to seriously consider Electronic Arts again now that the management had changed, it was with some irony that we said, hey, by the way, if we do join you here sometime during the development of Ultima 7, you might want to know what we've put in the game. And so we shared with them the plot that basically, roasted Electronic Arts and basically, called them the evil empire and made fun of their logo and some of the personnel and all these other things. And actually EA was very circumspect about that. I actually thought it was good fun. I mean, people have been poking at EA forever. People have called them the evil empire before and since. And so they didn't, their egos were not bruised. In fact, if anything, I think they found good fun in the kind of being teased around an area which might have some truth to it. And so it was actually during Ultima 7, it was just prior to the release of Ultima 7, or at least past the middle point in Ultima 7, is when we became part of Electronic Arts.
Okay. Oh, that's actually I don't know, that I kind of raises my respect a little bit for them that they were totally cool and laughed that off. But that's probably about as far as my respect for them goes at this point.
I still have lingering concerns myself, I must say.
So jumping ahead a little bit, one section I was really hoping would come up in your book, which I did not happen to see, was talk about Ultima 9, which is polarizing, to say the least. But you yourself, actually, I've seen you say that you were actually quite happy with how Ultima 9 turned out.
Yeah, ultimately. So let me explain that. Yeah, and I agree, it is extremely polarizing. And, it's interesting that Ultima 9 gets all kinds of flack for all kinds of reasons, some of which I think it is fairly deserved, but I can explain at least the rationale for what our thought process was. But I still think the people who were disappointed or offended by certain decisions we made, I can understand their perspective. And then there are certain areas where it's unfortunate and goes back again to that relationship with Electronic Arts. that there were things that were not as they should be at launch that we corrected. But this was before really the days of the internet being able to do regular patches and things nicely. And so even though we, quote, fixed it, hardly anybody knows or cares that we fixed it. And so let me explain kind of the trajectory of how this went. So when we first started working on Ultima Online, and we were working on Ultima Online and Ultima 9 at about the same time. And when we pitched both those games at Electronic Arts, this was before there were any massively multiplayer games to speak of in the world. And so when we pitched it, EA said, we have no interest and we don't believe there's a market for a game like Ultima Online. And so they basically said,
that's right,
you guys, you can't do it. And they said, on the other hand, we really want Ultima 9. Well, that's the game because, we believe in the Ultima series. We had a bauble with Ultima 8. They were eager for us to kind of replant the crowning anchor back with the Ultima series. And so basically they supported Ultima 9 and were doing everything they could to stop any thoughts about Ultima Online. And we pitched Ultima Online for 3 cycles. So it's once every 6 months for a period of a year. Once every 6 months we came back to pitch Ultima Online. And then finally, the time they originally kind of got it and kind of saw that it was happening was only after we produced this demo, and the demo discs that we made available, where we charged people $5 a copy for the privilege of being sent, a beta copy of the CD. The beta test dramatically outsold their lifetime sales units for the finished game. And so immediately EA goes, whoops, I guess we were wrong on UO versus U9. And then they changed they switched their tune. They said, we no longer want Ultima 9. We only want Ultima Online.
Right.
And we want you to cancel Ultima 9 and put all those resources on Ultima Online. And I was like, you guys have screwed me once going the other way. I refuse to do it. And I said, because if I do, they said, oh, we'll let you finish Ultima 9 later. And I said, no, you won't. You know how this goes. I want to keep Ultima 9 going. And so eventually what I agreed to was we throttled the team down on Ultima 9 to a skeleton crew. We put most of those people on Ultima Online. Ultima Online came out and was the best-selling PC game in Origin and EA history. And as I suspected, they said, what we really want right now is Ultima Online 2. We really don't ever want Ultima 9. And I was like, see, I told you guys this was going to happen. And I basically said, I'm going to finish Ultima 9. You have no choice. I'm gonna find dollars on the side. I basically was a non-compliant employee and began to. In fact, this is really what ended my career at EA, I believe, was my non-compliance with management dictate from the top down. And so I basically, Ultima 9 was finished only because of personal will to make it happen.
Right.
That also, therefore, meant, though, that even to the degree I was able to put some staff on it and get it finished, people wanted me to be done with it and move on as soon as possible. And so we made a strategic error, which was to release it prior to certain aspects of kind of a fine-tuning and debugging. And so the critiques of Ultima 9, in my mind, fall into 2 areas, one of which I'll take the blame for, and one of which I'll try to pass the buck over to mismanagement from our parent company. The ones that I can take the blame for, which I get made fun of by, there's a guy named Spoonie that loves to rip on Ultima 9.
Absolutely.
And the classic phrase that he likes to rip on is, when the Avatar is talking to somebody and says, you should go find a paladin, and the Avatar goes, "What's a paladin? What's a paladin?" That's the classic. But the reason there are things like that exist was because we had good evidence to show that recent Ultima players were not the same people as older Ultima players.
Right.
And so there were a lot of very new people coming into the game. And so we had actually, consciously gone out and tried to make sure that if you had not been an Ultima player before, because it had been, the number of years since Ultima 7, the last really great one, was 5 or 6 years. And so we assumed and believed we really needed to write this thing that introduced people to role-playing games more carefully. Mm-hmm. However, it in fact does sound pretty silly when the avatars up there saying like, what's a paladin?
What is the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom?
Yeah. And so I would sit there and go like, okay, that's a fair cop. That was my decision. To be made fun of that is fair and reasonable. But on the flip side of that, there were certain aspects of kind of smoothness of the user interface or clean quality connections between plot threads. All those things that we normally do in that last 10 or 20% of the time, which is really what makes a game great, is that last 10 or 20% of the time. And we shortcut that a lot. And that was really just because of the pressure we were getting to ship it, move on, or kill it. And so I was, every day in that last 20%, I was sort of just fighting to keep the project alive. And unfortunately, it shipped with some real problems. And of course, as soon as you have a bazillion playtesters, you see the problems really easily, and you can fix the problems really easily. But they've already had that taste in their mouth of it didn't go well. Mm-hmm. And so those things we did fix. Ultimately, I think it's I think it's a great game. But you need to play on the fixed version, and you need to forgive its what's a paladin.
So if they had allowed you, would you have continued the series beyond? Like, would there have been an Ultima 10?
Oh, unquestionably. No, in fact, I have the design documents for Ultima 10.
Oh, wow.
And so unquestionably, we would have continued both online and offline, and maybe some hybrids. I mean, it's hard to say exactly how it would evolve from an online and offline standpoint, but unquestionably, we would have continued it. So
how would Ultima 9 have ended if you were given like the carte blanche, like if you were allowed to do whatever you wanted? Because you probably would not have ended with killing the Avatar, I'm going to guess.
Well, interestingly, I might have sent that Avatar off to Valhalla, so to speak, metaphorically.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not sure what I would have done physically with the world. We actually had multiple endings to Ultima 9, and the one we selected was based upon the reality that we faced, for the future of the line. But you'll recognize this, even though you only came in starting with Ultima 6. Ultimas 1, 2, and 3 really were, and a Calibeth before that, they really were just me learning how to program. How to program in BASIC, how to program in assembly, how to, I had 3D dungeons, 2D outdoors, spaceships flying around, time travels through gates. It was basically anything I thought was cool in movies or books that I was exposed to, all tried to be crammed into one experience, kind of hodgepodge. And it wasn't until Ultima 4 that I began to create my own world. But again, with Ultima 4, and Ultima 4, I think, is the first great Ultima.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very familiar with the Ultima series. I just I just didn't get around to playing it until Ultima 6, but I'm very familiar with the story of 4 and 5.
But when you think of Ultima 5, when I wrote Ultima 4, I wasn't thinking about an Ultima 5. And so with each Ultima, I started to go, I guess I'm going to do another one. How did I end the story before, and how can I build upon it? And if you look at the earliest ones, they are completely unrelated. Ultima 1 is placed in my D&D world of Caesarea. Ultima 2 takes place on Earth to make time travel relevant. Ultima 3 sort of goes back to Caesarea, but not exactly. It goes to some other new place. And only with Ultima 4 do I invent my entire world from scratch with Britannia. And so with 5 and 6, I sort of look back to decide, where can I start now? And it was only starting with Ultima 7 that I said, hey, you know what? These might go on for a while. They seem to have lasted. Let me at least bring some main characters in that other than Lord British, who go forward in time. I already had the companions at that point and a few of the town leaders that were friends and family generally. But I was beginning to think more long term, starting with 7.
So would you have just kept making more and more Ultima games until the end? Is there any point, do you have any idea of when the series might have stopped on your terms?
No. I mean, if you look at, you look at other games that have come into existence since, and most of them are still going on to this day. So
yeah, absolutely.
I think that's one of the greatest disappointments is that EA, not only did EA basically kill it, but EA won't let it restart. And that I find, even more sad is that myself and others have all tried to convince EA to allow the trademark to be brought back. In fact, I've offered numerous times to help or encourage them to do it without me if that was what was necessary. But they will neither let it go nor work on it.
Right.
It appears.
But you did get an opportunity to make Shroud of the Avatar.
Well, the way I would describe it is, I describe it as a spiritual successor to Ultima.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is that, while a lot of specifics about the individual story of Ultima I couldn't bring forward. Lord British is my own trademark. Obviously, the design ideals of sandbox role-playing games and storylines that include virtues and ethical behavior is not protected. In fact, lots of other people do it now. Mm-hmm. It's interesting how, I even hear people talk about how newer games will do a character creation in some sort of interview process, and I'm going, yeah, I know, I started that. It's they talk about it like something new, and I'm going, no, that's not that new. It has a history. I was there, and and so Shroud of the Avatar is sort of picking up where I left off as much as possible, and then even continue to explore things. Like if you look back at Ultima, we were stabbing in the dark to create features each time around. Mm-hmm. Whether it was NPCs with conversations or NPCs with schedules for the day and night, or ethical parables at all, or this character creation with an interview process to make sure that it is your avatar and not some alter ego character you're playing. All those things were just kind of stabs in the dark. And the same thing was true with Shroud of the Avatar, where, one of the things I believe is that it's always fun to play with other people, but it's a story is much easier told in a single player setting. Mm-hmm. And so we tried to create a set of tools that would allow you to do both of these things. And Shroud of the Avatar, as each Ultima I've done, we push forward on a number of fronts, some of which turn out great, and some of which turn out to be completely useless. Right. A completely useless example that you probably have heard on the Ultima Online front was the virtual ecology. Ecology,
yes.
Yeah. Which still I see other game makers occasionally broadcasting their intent to do. And I almost always wave my hands, in the air and go like, beware, there be dragons here, there be dragons. You ought to at least get a debrief before you go dive down that path. Mm-hmm. Because there are plenty of things we've done that have stuck around, and there are innumerable things we've done that most people don't remember, or if they do, not well, that have been removed and replaced with newer features going forward.
And so what's the fate of Shroud of the Avatar now? I believe that it was... I believe the assets have been sold off.
Well, the team now is still is operating it and continuing to build it, and will hopefully provide value back to investors and such. But it had the structure, the kind of corporate structure that was over Portalarium, since it's really a one product company. We just collapsed the corporate structure, but the team members remain the same. The work remains the same. Episode 2 is now in development. Hopefully it will continue to at least remain stable, and hopefully grow and thrive as it moves forward to the future. What's not likely to happen is to see a Portalarium that would publish 10 other products.
Right.
And so but Shroud of the Avatar is has a solid and stable community, and hopefully will continue to grow.
Is there any push being made to address concerns from Kickstarter backers?
Depends what you mean, what concerns you might be referring to.
I am actually not sure of this because I was not involved in Kickstarter, but just one of the recurring questions when I asked the community what they would like to hear from you, a lot of them brought up unfulfilled Kickstarter perks.
Okay. Yeah, so what's interesting about this is that, when you do a Kickstarter, you do the Kickstarter before a product exists at all. Mm-hmm. And so you're sitting here saying, okay, this is what we think is going to happen. But we make it very clear at the very beginning that, by the way, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And by the way, that's true in the military, and it's true in software development. And so you have to think on your feet and make changes. Like, for example, one of the things that we wanted to provide people was that if you were a Duke level backer, of which there's maybe 200 out of the tens of thousands. So for these 200 people, we wanted to give them a custom face within the game. However, as it turns out, the technology as it evolved made that not plausible. And so instead, we gave them other digital assets that we thought had that same monetary value. And so we swap out things which we think are of comparable or hopefully better value to the players when we find one of those earliest things is not manageable. And we've done it since the beginning, by the way. It's not a new thing or an old thing. But inevitably, some people come up there who's like, no, I really want the original thing. We're like, well, read the fine print. It says these can all be changed out and swapped out because when we start a Kickstarter, you don't have a game. And so it's impossible to know exactly what will be possible and won't be possible. And so, yes, we have modified numerous, plans with the reality of what was done. And there are still some people who, would, grumble that they want it the original way. But no, we've told people, on all those Kickstarter promises, we've already told people that, there's, by the way, 85-90% of them were fulfilled exactly as planned, but something like 10 or 15% of them had to be swapped out for something else. Right.
So are you still involved with Shroud of the Avatar then? Like, are you still working on that?
Absolutely. So, so what's interesting is it's very easy for people to either overestimate or underestimate my involvement on all games.
Right.
Let's go back to Ultima 7, which was a phenomenally great game. If you try to pick on almost any feature and say, who is the person who's responsible for that being great, my name would not be on the list. It would be, where did the story come from? And it was people like Warren Spector and the team that he, the story team and his guidance of that made it so wonderful. If you thought about combat, it'd be 2 or 3 of the programmers that work together in that whole system. If it'd be, et cetera. You could go point by point, and there's somebody else that you really should give credit for. Or Ultima Online, really, it's really Starlong who deserves the credit for Ultima Online. As much as, I've been there present during all of these, and I get to be the shepherd that describes the goalposts, where I sit back and say, look, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a game, like let's say if it's Ultima Online, we want to create a game that, not only is this, you and your avatar, we want to make sure there's a sense of the virtues, but it's going to be complicated to do storytelling, so we still have to figure out a way to bring that stuff forward. And we did try the virtual ecology, and so I would sort of lay out, here's the goalposts, here's what we're shooting for. But then the games that turn out the best, the individual contributors that build those systems go way beyond what even I had suggested. They just know where it fits in. I just get to kind of describe how the pieces fit together. And so yes, in the case of Shroud of the Avatar, the way I work with Shroud of the Avatar is as a player and critic, and to adjust the priorities of the future goalposts. And so, but what's interesting is that the team often will ignore me or overrule me or deprioritize things along the way. And so I play the game. I put the ideas that I believe we should be focusing on into our bug tracking system, which is not only tracking just bugs, but also bigger, ideals. And then the team breaks that down to parts and pieces they think are workable. And so, for example, I'll mention, kind of how that works. Like there's a guy named Brandon Cotton, who does a lot of the crafting and other skill interconnections, both how you train up your skills and how world objects react to your engagement with them. And so he knows that system obviously far better than I do. He wrote the whole thing. He also knows exactly what he had in mind when he put it together. And so when I come in and I go, I really think, we need to have whiskey that can be aged, because that way you can come back to it in 5 years, and that whiskey really will have been 5-year-old whiskey in real Earth time. And even though the whiskey isn't any different, I think it'll be cool to open a keg of it. And he'll go, okay, yeah, I get that. But by the way, that is unlike any other system we put in it. And so I can't give it priority right now. And by the way, it is in the game now finally, but it took like 4 years to get that in the game. And that's because he has to be on top of how and when that becomes a priority. And the same thing's true where, like, one of the ones I harp on these days is cannibalism. I am a pro-cannibalism game design guy. and but the rest of the team is not. And they could actually put it in any day of the week they wanted to, and I've occasionally got them to agree to do it, but they're all a bit unsettled by it. They actually, their general opinion is that in the case of Ultima Online, as much fun as people had with it, that people mostly use it for trolling behavior, and it actually tended to push people out of the game that you really wanted and needed in. And so we still have this debate all the time. But if I ever need to win one, I can always pull out a, quote, metaphoric silver bullet and just force it through. But otherwise, I put these goals up. We debate them as a team. The individual responsible for each system gets to have a fundamental authority, and we move forward. But yes, I'm still involved.
I also want to take the time now just to say on the record that for what I believe and hope to be the right reasons, I am a big fan of your inclusion of the child abuse in very many of your games. It is something which obviously takes your explanation of why it's there in order to understand it.
Yes, exactly. Which I'd be happy to give here too, just in case any of your listeners.
Absolutely, go for it.
I
think you deserve the chance to defend yourself on this one.
To explain. Let me help. Wait. Let me explain. Why is there cannibalism? Why are there these homages to killing children? So the story with that one, which is I actually think a really important story, it goes back to Ultima 4. And, when I was doing Ultima 4, and I had already decided upon the 8 virtues, honesty, compassion, valor, justice, sacrifice, honor, spirituality, and humility. The next problem is how do you make quests that show off those or engage you in a debate about each of those? Mm-hmm. And some of those you can at least imagine pretty easily. Like if it's courage, well, if I take on a monster that's tougher than me, it's courage. But if I run away from a monster that's much tougher than me, maybe that's not fear. Maybe that's actually just being smart. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So how to structure an interaction around the 8 virtues, first of all, is hard. The second part that I took with me as I was designing scenes in Ultima 4 was that after you've done a number of tests, as long as a test, that's almost as good as it actually being a test. Because if you think the game is going to judge you on it, it means you will think about it and act accordingly, even if I've not managed to code something behind it that will actually dock your points in these virtue areas. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the tests in the game actually were that. They were just things that looked like it would be a test. And so, for example, in the final dungeon, I did things like one room that you went into had a party that looked just like yours. One mage, one fighter, one tinker, one shepherd, one everything else. And that's what you would have with you when you came in the room. And so I thought, it'll look like it's a doppelganger of you, because the graphics were just little simple stick figures. Yeah. And so I thought, it's not really a test. I knew it would make you wonder if it's a test. And so I was like, okay, put it in. And one that I put in was this room very close to the end of the game where there were some cages in the corners, little prison cells. And in the center of the room was a switch. And if you threw the switch, the cages would open. And what was in those cages were the icons for children. And all children look the same in the game. There's not even you can't tell boy children from girl children or anything else. They're just a child. But in this case, those children were monsters. They actually would be set to attack you. And they had attributes of monsters. But they came from all 4 corners of the room, so they would pretty quickly surround you. And when you're surrounded and being attacked, your natural inclination will be to fight back. And I thought, well, this will be an interesting quandary, because the avatar who's trying to make sure they are on truly their best behavior will probably feel that they might be docked for murdering the children. When in fact, in my mind's eye, they're either vampires or zombies, or pick your own metaphor. The game wasn't even sophisticated enough at that time to tell you what they were. They were just monsters. And as far as I cared, kill them. They're monsters. But I knew that you would at least pause, and so I put it in the game. And a few weeks prior to the game being published, one of our QA staffers was playing through the game, saw that room, and wrote a letter to my brother Robert, basically complaining that he refused to work for a company that so clearly supported child abuse. And my brother came to me with this letter saying, Richard, what in the hell have you put in your game? And I'm like, actually, I have no idea. I'm curious what he's talking about. And so we go and interview the QA person. He tells us this is the room. And my brother says, Richard, you have to take this out of the game. And I'm like going, you've got to be kidding me. This letter tells me this was a great moment in this game. The fact that I have provoked a deep emotional reaction is so hard to do in a game, and that I'm proud that I've done it. And by the way, he's wrong. They're monsters. You can kill them. He said, but they do look like children, so if you don't want to kill them, you can charm them and they'll walk away. You can put them to sleep and then you can walk away. You can put down your sword and hit them with your fist until they take 50% damage, and then they will run away. Or you can don't throw the switch, just walk out of the room. And I said, there's plenty of ways past it if you're at all concerned, and I'm actually pleased that you are concerned, but I won't take it out of the room, out of the game. And the argument eventually went from my brother. He got my dad to try to get me to take it out. They got my mom to try to make me take it out. They were our board members and investors. My mom was our art director. And I basically was alone saying, guys, I refuse to take it out. And they were like, we're not going to publish it. And I said, well, you can not publish it if you want, because I'm not taking it out. And so eventually I won that another argument. It came out and no one ever complained about it. So, I mean, no one even noticed it as far as I know. But I still was very proud that it went in. But because of that debate, because it was such a deep family argument, I have put the homage to killing children in every game I've done since. And so, including Shroud of the Avatar, there's a room in Shroud of the Avatar where you're going down in a dungeon that is largely an illusion, and that's your first clue that you can just do this. It's okay. But deep in the dungeon, you find a man that is being tortured, then a woman that is being tortured, then a child that is being tortured, and then you find a cage where there's the man and the woman and the child. If you've rescued them, they have ended up in this cage. And as you go to pull the lever to try to let them out of this final scene, they are crushed by a person crusher. And so you are therefore, again, sort of responsible for their death. And even though this entire dungeon is an illusion, so it literally is not real.
Right.
There was enough concern by the team that people would still complain about it, that the team put a back door in. So there's actually a way you can pass that room with great effort to where you don't squish the illusionary man, woman, and child. But again, it's an illusion. Squish him.
Yeah. In one exception, though, there was, you mentioned a moment in Tabula Rasa where somebody went over your head and refused to include such a scene.
Yes, that was Susan Cath, whose name should live in infamy, just like Pearl Harbor.
What was it? What was the moment that you had in mind? What did you have planned?
Boy, let's see what exactly it was. To be honest, I don't even remember what the moment was. But I think that, as you've noted, Susan did not implement it as designed. So I can't actually tell you with great authority what part of it made it and what part of it did not at this stage. But yes, I did have one non-compliant team member who just like for Shroud of the Avatar, they felt they had to provide a backdoor just in case there's some soft-hearted people against holographic projections. But yes, Susan was refused to implement as designed.
We'll just dip into the mailbag here.
Sure.
We have, this is going to be in two parts, because one is not really a question. It just comes from Tim Byrne from the Classic Gamers Guild Facebook page, who says, thanks for all the years of entertainment and joy your creations have brought. And to follow that up, Black Mage from the Ultima Dragons asks, have you ever just sat and wondered exactly how many lives your games have impacted?
Oh, well, first, thanks to both. One of the joys of getting in early like I did is just that you get to lay some of the foundations and have a chance to do what you've described, which is not only reach people early and often, but make some of these, have some moments that have advanced the state of the art, and but yes, I do occasionally sit back and just sit to myself and smile about the wonderful opportunity I've been afforded. And what's interesting about that is that, of course, I think I work hard and I think I'm a pretty smart guy, but I know there are plenty of other people who work harder and plenty of other people that are smarter. I had the third pillar, which was I was just really lucky to be born at just the right place and time. And so as much as fun as it might be to reflect on, the fact that I have had the opportunity to affect the industry and people in the way that I have, I also recognize that, boy, was I really lucky to be able to be in that position.
We have one from Greg Frantz of the Classic Gamers Guild Facebook group who asks, I want to hear the story of how you hired Chris Roberts. Heard it a few ways, but not from you.
Yeah, so that was actually kind of funny. Chris and I are both folks that kind of go back to the very earliest days of personal computing. In his case, while I'm an American that happened to be born to American parents while they were in England, and thus I carry a British passport, and the Lord British sort of makes some sense. Chris is sort of reversed. His parents are British, but he was born in the United States, but started his game development career back in England. And his early work was on some of these, even before, or at least similar time frame, but much cheaper and popular in Europe, were these like a Sinclair ZX81, these kind of almost laptop-sized, simple Z80 processor little computing devices. And so he had written 2 or 3 games on the Sinclair and released them over in England. And then his parents, who were living in Austin, Texas, he came to Texas to do some work on what he was going to be his next game. And in this case, it was going to be on the Apple II. And so he was living, unbeknownst to us, there in Austin, Texas. With Origin, as we started to grow in Austin, Texas, we're, of course, hiring all kinds of different people. We're hiring designers and programmers and artists at a high rate of speed. And the gentleman who had done all of the covers, in fact, did all the covers of all my games up through and including Shroud of the Avatar, starting with a Calibeth. The only cover he did not do was Ultima 2, published by Sierra. Every other cover of every one of my games, the art has been done by a gentleman by the name of Dennis Loubet, one of my favorite artists in the industry. And so when Origin was growing in Austin, it was obvious that one of the key hires we should make to bring in-house was Dennis Loubet. And so we reached out to Dennis, offered him a full-time position in-house. He accepted and came and moved into the office. And by the way, all of these first generation of artists during this growth era of Origin were people who had never done art on a computer. These were all people we had to train to do art on a computer. And and so Dennis fit that bill too. We brought him in house, handed him a mouse and a keyboard, and we all started working and learning together. Well, it turns out that Dennis had, prior to us bringing him in house, he had been doing the artwork as kind of work for hire for Chris Roberts for his new small little game here in Austin. And so we basically stole his artist and shut down his game. And so, he called Dennis and say, like, hey, Dennis, what's happening? You're not doing my art anymore. I said, yeah, no, I took this job with Origin. So Chris is like, who's Origin? Who are these jerks that stole you away? And so Chris came over to see Origin. We also therefore got to see his the game that he was working on. I think this was Times of Lore. And but we said, well, hey, if you still want access to Dennis and all these other artists, why don't you just come bring your game in-house here at Origin? Because all of us who were authors with Origin at the time, myself included, were really freelancers. So, I paid for all of the development of what went into the Ultimas at that time. It's just that Origin had a stable of resources, artists and programmers, et cetera, that we could all pull from to do that work. And so that was obviously quite interesting from Chris's standpoint too. So immediately he joined us and began to produce his games at Origin.
So actually, one part that I'm a little bit hazy on from your book in Explore Create was you did mention when you worked for Sierra. So what was it like working at Sierra, and what ended up? Why did you leave, or did you leave, or did they?
I left, and so what's interesting about this early era of the gaming industry is how simultaneously wondrous this spectacle was, and also incredibly broken as a business it was. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, when I went to meet with my first publisher to sign a contract and start marketing at Calabeth, then Ultima, that was also the very same day by these same people was the day that I was introduced to hard drugs. The early era of the computer game industry was rife with cocaine use, especially in California. And so when I would go to California, even to do a magazine interview, it was not at all uncommon. In fact, I would say it was almost universal, that the people doing the interview would be scratching out lines of cocaine on the tabletop of the table in the glass conference room that we were all sitting in the middle of the rest of the employees. And so no surprise, a lot of these early companies were both making tons of money, but also blowing, literally, lots of money. And so my first publisher, California Pacific, was still selling my games and the other games extremely strongly. The sales were going very well. And yet they suddenly were unable to pay the bills. And so they basically quit paying me. And so that's when I became a free agent. Looked around. It was Sierra that would agree to my outrageous demands of putting the game, instead of in a Ziploc bag, in a box for the first time. Ultima 2 is really the first game in a box in the computer gaming industry. They also agreed to the even more outrageous demand of a cloth map, which added dramatically to the cost of goods. And so I moved over to Sierra. Now, interestingly, Sierra was mercifully free of the hard drugs, at least as far as I knew. But drinks and smokes of various kinds were still rampant. And so, it was common on work days to have, the principals of the company, bringing around, cases of liquor, where everybody kind of gets, plastered, just lying around on the floor of the office. And so still it was a lifestyle of excess. And guess what? Even though Ultima 2 sold very well, there came a time halfway through its sales that they also quit paying me. And so therefore I became a free agent again. And in both of these times, I actually had called my brother Robert up, my older brother, who was getting 2 business degrees and 2 electrical engineering degrees. And I'd say, look, Robert, can you help me collect from these deadbeats? And he tried in both cases and failed in both cases. And after that second time, he's saying, Richard, you and I just ought to go into business together, because I promise you I'm a better businessman than they are. And I can also promise you that if we get money from the sales of your games, I will pay you. And I said, oh, well, that's a better deal than I've ever had before. So yeah, let's do it. So it was really my brother Robert that that was responsible for our beginning of Origin.
Stephen Walvick from the Ultima Dragons asks, has your view on what defines virtues grown or changed since Ultima 4?
That's an interesting question, because when I was developing the virtues, you may have heard me sort of describe the process I went through. But it's one of my proudest probably design contribution. It's definitely the one I worked the hardest on, and it came like this. It wasn't until we started Origin, which the Origin's first product was Ultima 3. That's the first time I got fan mail, and fan mail then, to the degree I ever get it anymore, it still is this way. Now it's emails, but anyone writing in usually goes one paragraph or line of, hey, I liked your games. And then however much longer they're interested in writing is, let me tell you what you did wrong and how to do it better. And so everyone's a critic, and that's pretty much all you get as feedback. But it was interesting to see also in that feedback that I got starting with Ultima 3, what the side effects were of some of the design decisions that I had done. Like in the early Ultimas, you could sneak around behind the counters of shops and steal stuff, and then the guards would chase you out if you got caught. And most people thought of that as fun. I thought it was fun. But it turns out it became the lifestyle. I mean, instead of being a heroic character, I was training people literally to be thieves and brigands. And the greatest joy the players generally had was to kill off Lord British and all the townspeople, kill YOLO, kill the guards, kill all the characters I'd made, especially if they already won the game once. The way to go back and continue to have fun with it is to kill everybody. Mm-hmm. And I'm going, wait a minute, that's probably not the best game design I could think of. And I said, I'm going to make a game about virtue. I said, okay, well, what does that mean? What am I going to write about specifically? And I went, well, okay, what are your sources? Well, of course, there's religious sources, and I'm going, well, not only personally not a religious person, but I thought that if I started down a game with a religious doctrine as a backbone, that would wouldn't get me where I thought I wanted to be. So I then started reading philosophy. I said, okay, well, what about Plato and Aristotle and all these people? What do they say about life and virtue? And if you go back and read their works, they're a bit dated, right? They're still misogynistic. They're still racist. They still, they're just things that they didn't necessarily hold up that well through time. Mm-hmm. And then you go like, wow, well, I could maybe do the 7 deadly sins, but then that goes back to both scary movies and also the religious factor. And I suddenly realized I can't find the basis of virtue that I believe in personally as a modern person, and would also make a good game. So I'm going to have to make my own philosophy from scratch. And as soon as I realized that, I was going like, oh my God, I'm doomed. Because, a lot of good thinkers have spent a lot of time over eons doing this. And so I said, well, but, let's try it. And so I literally got out a stack of Post-it notes. And I started going through encyclopedias and religious texts. And this is way before the internet, of course. And I started saying like, okay, I put a line across this kind of point on the wall. It was a big whiteboard. And I said, if it's something that motivates you to do good deeds, like honesty, I'm going to put it above the line. And if it's something that motivates you to do bad things, like greed, I'm going to put it below the line. And I just began to put Post-it notes up, above and below this line. Good deeds, this motivates you to do good deeds, this motivates you to do bad deeds. And then I would stare at it and I'd go, oh, you know what? A lot of these are sort of related to each other. And I would kind of go, honesty and truth, those are kind of related to each other, and dishonesty and falsehoods, those are kind of the opposite. So I began to organize left and right on the same board, not only up and down, but left and right, into little puddles of things that were related to each other. And eventually, after spending literally months adding to and staring at this wall, I had this epiphany, and I saw that almost everything I could see above the line had aspects of truth and love and courage in it, or a mixture of them, or maybe had one but not the other. And similarly, the things below the line were the ones that were more in absence of those same 3 principles. And then I began to notice I could combine them in these 8 ways that became the 8 virtues. and so as I was kind of sorting this out and kind of coming to this realization that I think I actually may have found in this random pile, not the truth with a capital T, truthiness, but something that was at least a good way to talk about them and describe motivations. That was true, that felt actual. And then it was about that same time that I was watching some movies that I'm a big fan of. So I'm a huge fan of The Wizard of Oz. Right. And I happened to be watching The Wizard of Oz again and went, wait a minute, truth, the scarecrow looking for brain, looking for knowledge and truth, or the cowardly lion obviously looking for courage, and the Tin Man obviously looking for love, truth, love, and courage. There it is in that particular reality. Mm-hmm. And then I began to notice in other pieces of fiction through time, they didn't necessarily use the same words, but other people had sort of bounced against similar ideas, and so that sort of reinforced to me that I must be onto something. And so I know the first question is have I ever reconsidered and done others? Well, I am pretty darn happy with Truth, Love, and Courage. Yeah. And as I have explored looking for others, I actually constantly come back to Truth, Love, and Courage. And I think that if I were to try to make up another one to compete with it or just be different from it, it would be inferior. I have never created or been able to think of a foundation that is more solid than Truth, Love, and Courage.
Did you come up with, not saying this is superior, in fact by definition it was vastly inferior, but did you come up with the triad of inner strength from the Fellowship?
Absolutely, yes. And so unity, trust, and worthiness. So yes, I did come up with that one as well. But I specifically came up with it for the gaming purpose of, could it both be described as a positive but be utilized as a controlling negative? And so, unity is, we're all, come join our family. By being unified within our community, we can all lift each other up, and the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And as people, we rise together. So that's the unity is a good thing. But it could also be spun as, you're either with us or you're against us, which means if you're on the inside, you're our best friend. But if we can't convince you to join us, then you're the enemy, and you should be fought and resisted. And then trust, where we said, look, if you want to join our community, you have to prove that you're trustworthy. So we want you to tell us everything you do. We want to examine your life deeply. And so, the good news is we want you to be trustworthy, but we also just want you to trust us. We know what's better for you. Please just trust us, because we've already proven that we're trustworthy. So just trust us. If we tell you to go do something that might sound objectionable, just trust us.
Don't question it. Yeah.
Don't question it. Just do it. And then worthiness, to saying, you should be worthy of your deity / idealism. And so you want to uplift it. You want to work for the cause. You want to be worthy you want to be a worthy member of the community. You want to contribute to the community, because we want every member of our community to be a good contributor to the community. But what that also means, though, is, if we tell you to go, knock off a bad guy or something we perceive as a bad guy, and then, come back to us, then that's how you prove yourself worthy, is by doing what we tell you to do. And so, anyway, you see how those are can be seen as communal positives, but can also be used as a way to control people. And being a person who believes that a lot of, in my mind, organized religions, or especially the cult-like religions, have a lot of these attributes built in. And so, I was also being inspired by things I saw in practical reality around us.
Which brings me to a question from Aaron Bowie of the Ultimate Dragons, where he asks, at what point did you decide that the Guardian would be the Avatar's evil half? Like, was that something that you thought from the beginning, or is that something that sort of came about along the way?
I don't remember if we had it literally from the get-go. I think the original idea for the Guardian really was just to have a bad guy that would live on through 3 games. And that was, so during Ultima 7, that may have been the only, or at least the foundational idea, was just that it was somebody. When I sat down and created the Guardian, I wanted the Guardian, unlike previous bad guys in my games and most others to this day, instead of just sitting around waiting for you at the final level to come be powerful enough to kill them, I wanted the Guardian to be active. I wanted the Guardian to, if you managed to convince a thief that was working for the Guardian to turn over a new leaf and be a good guy and tell you what the Guardian's up to, I wanted the Guardian to go then murder that person. To both show you that the Guardian is really a bad guy, and also to make you worried about what you do, because you just got somebody killed by trying to do the right thing. And so giving the Guardian the chance to survive through multiple games, and the chance to be an active nemesis was kind of the seed of the Guardian. Somewhere near the end of Ultima 7, or it might have been in Ultima 8, we then expanded that to go, we were beginning to think about, well, how's this going to end? And we'd already been doing these stories regularly where, Lord British, the character, is, I tried to make sure that whenever bad things needed to happen, that he was captured or, his mind was somehow off his game, to make sure that Lord British was always a good guy, because I'm a good guy, But we thought we wanted to, we knew we would similarly like to, make it a really big deal to get rid of him, that the way to get rid of him couldn't just be by hitting him over the head with a club, metaphorically. It had to be something much deeper than that. And that's when we thought of this entanglement.
So going back, I just thought of this now. You mentioned how the players have this strange tendency to all try to kill Lord British throughout your games.
Yeah.
Which is actually kind of one of my favorite memories of the games, because it was like sort of one of my fondest memories of playing games with my brother. During Ultima 6, we obviously came across the fact that, number one, Lord British was unkillable, and number two, he had the touch of death. Any single strike from him can kill anyone, including the Avatar. So we actually came up with a bit of a game within the game where we would antagonize Lord British to rile him up, and then see how long we could last before he would kill us. So it became sort of like a survival horror game where we would just try to see how many moves we can get before being killed by Lord British. First by antagonizing you, then like throwing our party members in between us, so you would take time to kill them, and hopefully we can get to a place of safety. And that's actually how we discovered how to kill Lord British in Ultima 6, because at one point we just decided, okay, well, we're going to antagonize him with this glass sword while he's sleeping. And it turns out that was actually like the one state in which Lord British turns out to be somewhat vulnerable and able to be killed by a glass sword.
Yeah, well, in fact, let me even explain that. So, what's fascinating is, again, going back to Ultima 3, that was sort of the time that I realized that everybody was killing me and all the NPCs. And so I'm going like, oh, that won't do. And so, starting with Ultima 4, in fact, it might have even been in Ultima 3. Oh, it's so hard to remember now. I said, okay, I'm going to make Lord British immortal. But my first attempt at making Lord British immortal failed. And the reason why that one failed is if you attacked Lord British, he would take no damage, and then he would come and slowly kill you. And that part of it worked just fine. But what I had failed to do was think about the fact that if you antagonized Lord British in his castle, you could run out to the moat in the castle, and behind the castle was a ship. And so if you jumped on that ship and then moved one square away into the middle of the moat, Lord British couldn't get to you to kill you. And so first of all, you could sit there and survive. But the second thing you could do is shoot the ship's cannons at Lord British. And it turns out that went through a different damage routine that I didn't check what the character was you were shooting at. In fact, it didn't even do damage. When you shot a ship's cannons, it was a completely different algorithm. It just basically said 50-50 chance whatever you shot at is dead. Doesn't matter what it is, tall, small, doesn't matter. 50-50 chance is dead. So when you get on the ship, shoot at Lord British, do it 2 or 3 times, Lord British is dead. And so everybody figured that one out. I'm going like, oh, here I thought that I had, fixed this one. And then we went up to the glass sword one, where, as you've noticed, when Lord British is asleep, the icon is not the king icon.
Yeah.
It was only used for Lord British. It was the sleeping character icon. And that was what was tested during the damage routine. And so if you used anything other than the glass sword, it wouldn't work because it would wake him up. If you couldn't kill him in one shot, he would wake up and then he'd be back to being the king icon again. And so no damage could be taken. And so it was just a loophole, that fell in. And as it turns out, there were loopholes starting with, 3, 4, 5, 6, and finally with 7. I believe we actually plugged all the unknown loopholes, but instead the team put in a way to do it on purpose.
Yeah.
And that was, big fun too, because, my big thing to the team, and there's stories around this principle also, but my big thing to the team was, if you put Easter eggs in the game, that's all great. We all love Easter eggs, but you have to at least tell me what they are so that I can make sure we don't do something that, I don't want to be embarrassed by or have something unknown in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this case, when the team said, okay, we want to put in a way, we're pretty sure you can't kill Lord British by any, unforeseen ways. But we're going to add one of our own. And the one they put in was the metal plaque. Because just before that, there had been something happen for real in our office where one night I was leaving and the woman I was dating was leaving the office building. And we came down to the front door, and the front doors, these glass doors that are normally held shut by electromagnets and a metal plate at the top corner of the door, where the electromagnets are holding that plate, and that plate is screwed to the glass door. And so that's what prevents somebody from outside coming in without having a code. As we approached the door, both of us noticed the door was slightly ajar. And so instead of pressing the exit button, my girlfriend just walked through the door. And when I get under the door, I just instinctually reach over and press the red button that says this for exit. And it turns out the reason the door was ajar is because the screw had come loose. And so the metal plate is still sitting there up on that magnet. And so when I'm standing under it and press the button to release the electromagnet, this large metal plate comes down from 12 to 15 feet up, hits me square in the top of the head, busts my skin open, and got 17 staples in my head, knocks me flat on the ground in a big pool of blood. My girlfriend runs back into the, screaming back into the office going, Richard's been hurt, Richard's been hurt. People come out to find me in this pool of blood in the entryway of the building. No big deal other than 17 stitches. But that was what they put in the game. So they decided that in Lord British's castle, there's plaques over all the doorways that say throne room, food storage, whatever else it might be. And one of those in particular, if you wait till Lord British is walking exactly under it and double click on the plaque will fall down, hit Lord British on the head, and kill him. Mm-hmm.
Which I found completely accidentally. I just happened to want to read that sign at the moment that you were standing under it.
That just shows you, there's always a way. Mm-hmm. And but in this case, I actually think they even put some, Lord British was not married to this point, since Lord British is really me, so he's always kind of paralleled my real life existence. But in this particular case, they put some documents in Lord British's possession about him, having an affair with the housekeeper or something at the castle or something.
That's
really,
right.
Something of that nature. I can't remember exactly, but the team was just having fun, poking fun at me. But the one, by the way, this one you may not know, which is again in Ultima 7. One of the QA folks came to me and said, "Hey, Richard, I was scanning the map for some reason, and I found a treasure room in a mountain that you probably ought to come see." And we went over to see it on this QA person's desk, and sure enough, somebody had created a room with every object needed to finish the game. And and so this was a thing such that if any real player had found this, it would mean that they could finish the game without ever doing any of the plot. And so this was exactly the kind of thing that I had told the team, you do not do this without telling me, because we have to be the final arbiters as to which one of those, those Easter eggs we leave in. Mm-hmm. And so we were going, okay, some designer has gone off the radar and put something in that we did not agree to. Mm-hmm. And so very quietly we said, okay, nobody tell anybody. Let's bring in a programmer. We got the programmer and said, there's probably a teleporter somewhere on the world map that sends you into this room. Please go find it. And we went and found it, and sure enough, it was an area, and we knew this guy named John, whose area this was, whose responsibility was to build out this area. So we can go, okay, John has made himself his own Easter egg. Let's change it. And so we actually made a new back door to go to that treasure room. So the treasure room actually stayed in the game. We made a much more hidden treasure way to get there that I don't think anybody ever discovered. Oh. And we made John's teleporter teleport you to a new place. And that new place was a small room where you would be standing before Lord British. Lord British would go, "How dare you cheat? You are thieving scumbag. You've been found guilty of treason, and you are found. The punishment will be now, and that punishment is death." And then we had these fireballs and these other things kind of unleash this cataclysm on whoever the player was that would stand there. So that was our sort of retribution against John. and we then left in our own backdoor just in case it would ever be useful to have the room with all the answers in it.
So just a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
One comes from our Patreon supporter, Bruce Bernizzi, who asks, how did the Avatar go from being this, basically a role-playing game avatar, which is completely at the design of the player, into becoming a single character like the blonde hero who he becomes in the later games?
Well, so the answer would be it completely depends upon the level of technology and ability to showcase things. For example, if you think about Ultima 4, so in fact, I'll even go back before that. In Akalabeth, Ultima 1, Ultima 2, and even Ultima 3, your character is literally a single stick figure. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. It is the same stick figure. And because of that, I could then ask the question, do you think of yourself as a male or as a female or other? And so like in Ultima 3, 2 and 3, I think you could pick, you want to be a male, a female, or other. And the answer to that question made absolutely no difference whatsoever in the game. It was probably recorded, but I don't think it was ever even reprinted ever in the game at all. I mean, there was that resulting selection was never reused in the game. Then when we get up to Ultima 4, where I'm really wanting this, because I was doing a game about virtue, and I was going to judge you, the player, based upon whether you did good deeds or bad deeds. If you lie and cheat and steal, it's your fault. It's not because you're playing some alter ego. If you're playing a game as Conan the Barbarian, you should be expected to be ethically ambiguous. You're a thief and a scoundrel and a womanizer, and you should role play like a thief, a scoundrel, and a womanizer if you're playing as a bad character. And so I didn't want you to be playing your evil wizard counter alt. This has to be you, the player from Earth, who somehow finds their way into my world. And that's why we do the personality profile. That's why we do the moon gates that take you there. And so even if you might change your form physically in some way, this is your avatar, your manifestation in our world. But then we ran into the problem of, Ultima 4 has some cover art, and it is reasonable in cover art to expect to see the hero. And even though all good marketers would say, I want to see the front of that adventurer, that would immediately, in my mind, run contrary to this is you. Mm-hmm. And even though I had a fictional MacGuffin to say, by the way, you will transform physically when you become the avatar, but it is your soul, your spirit is in that avatar. But I still said I ought to make that avatar as nondescript as possible. And so that's why on Ultima 4 you see the avatar facing into the scene, and they have long hair. Blonde is arbitrary. But the fact that we had this long-haired adventurer facing away from you into the scene was so that you could use your imagination to fill in that that's me to the best we could. But it was never our intention to say you are this specific muscular blonde-haired dude. It's just that we're taking advantage of the technology as it comes. So in those middle Ultimas, we still didn't have enough artwork to give you any real variety in your character. We were just barely out of the stick figure era. Well, now we have, of course, very deep avatars where you adjust your eyebrows and cheekbones, much less your hair color, hairstyle, gender quandaries, etc. And so, while I clearly understand that critique, and we were doing the best we could at each stage, and I find it interesting that sometimes I'm given credit for giving you the first non-binary gender abilities in some of the early Ultimas, and I'm going, really, I would, I'm glad that it turned out to be important to people, but I have to tell you, it was not done because I was inspired to provide non-binary options. I just was doing what I thought was kind of fun and cute at the time. Now, by the way, as soon as I realized that it was meaningful to people, I then doubled down. But it was sort of an accidental discovery.
Mm-hmm. I guess one last question, which I think very many people have been asking. I don't think I've ever really heard you answer this one. What are your favorite games?
Oh, wow. So my favorite games, interestingly, I obviously play a lot of games still. Mm-hmm. But most games I play for only about an hour before I go, it's not for me, and put it away. And I'm sure that's true for a lot of us. But so if I went back and said, what are the games that I really loved? And in my mind, that means I loved it enough to continue playing it to completion if it was a solo player game, or for tens and tens of hours, hundreds of hours if it's a multiplayer game without an ending. Mm-hmm. My list would go like this: the first game I ever played to completion that I did not work on was Myst. And boy, do I to this day my memories of Myst are near to my heart. I enjoyed it deeply. Then. I know that was the first. The rest of these will be somewhat out of order. Mm-hmm. But I'm also a fan of the first Command & Conquer. The original Command & Conquer, I still think is likely, at least for me, is the best of these multiplayer real-time strategy games.
Right.
And it may just be biased by my memory of, as I was learning to play it, so was everybody else I knew. And so we were constantly taking turns as to who had the superior strategy, and the strategies unfolded very diversely with how you would use specialized units. And over the sequels that have come out since, for the most part, it's just a speed race of who can build the fastest. And so it lost some of the magic that the earliest ones did. I was also a big fan of the first Battlefield. I think Battlefield 1942 was the first one. Mm-hmm. And again, seeing a game where you could really use multiple vehicles or on foot, was just exceptional. I just enjoyed the heck out of it. On the MMO front, I was a big player of World of Warcraft. I think it's a phenomenal game. And in fact, anything the Blizzard guys do, I think they are still the kings of balance. They do the challenge and reward cycle better than anyone. I'm often inspired by how well they do it, and I often think about how can I learn from that and try to incorporate it into my own future work. More contemporaneously, I'm opening now my iPhone, because I actually do tons of gaming on my iPhone, and I have a folder here that I've just opened that I call AAA games. So it sorts to the top here of my folder list. And the first game I ever played on a mobile device that I finally said mobile games are going to be a big future, and a big future that I want to be in as a player, was a game called Spider, and where you control this little spider trying to catch flies around in an old house. And a phenomenally good game, especially for its day, but still quite enjoyable. Probably my favorite game of all time still on mobile devices is Plants vs. Zombies. But I also loved the Kingdom Rush games, all of them. Still play those. A little game called The Creeps, which I'm a fan of. And then some real interesting, on kind of a little bit less expected ones. Like there's a game called A Dark Room, and it's a game again on the iPhone, but it is all text-based. It's the only purely text-based game that I really, really enjoy, that I've loved a lot. And then I was a big fan of the Monument Valley games, another series I really like. Hope they get a third one out soon. And another odd one that a lot of people may not have heard of is a game called Old Man, a kind of a interesting side-scroller storytelling game that I happen to really enjoy. But anyway, that's sort of my pantheon of games. And I'm still waiting to fall in love with a VR game.
Right.
I'm ordering the new. What's the new system that just came out from Oculus? Anyway, I'm ordering it for the family for Christmas, and the lightsaber dueling game I hear great things about, so I'm going to give that one a try. That's my next hope for Obi-Wan Kenobi, your only hope. But I'm hoping Star Wars can finally make VR compelling.
One question for me on a personal level, I really must know this. Do you are you familiar with the Quest for Glory series?
Yes, yeah, oh yeah.
Are you a fan of those? Like, have you played through them?
I have not played through those, so but no, I've respected them, and I know lots of people have played them. I actually think it might be one that I would really enjoy, but no, I have not played them.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably no coincidence that the Quest for Glory series and the Ultima series are like my favorite, the all-time favorites, top of the list, because they do come across a lot of the same similar themes, very innovative for their time, each of them, and it's just wanted to see what your opinion on was then, because I believe I heard, if I'm not taking this out of context, I believe I heard that the Quest for Glory games were commissioned to be Sierra's answer to Ultima after you had left.
Yep.
Not to take anything away from Laurie or Corey Cole, because that is absolutely their vision and the game that they wanted to make.
Of course.
But,
and I've heard nothing but good things about them too. So there's it is interesting that you'll notice on all the lists of the games that I did mention on my list, there's very few role-playing games.
Yeah.
And so there's World of Warcraft, and I was also a big fan of Diablo, also from Blizzard, also a kind of a action RPG, but most others were not. And so interestingly, while I really enjoy creating virtual world role-playing games, maybe it's because I compare them immediately to what I'm doing myself. But there's tons of ones that people have really liked, that I've sat down and gone and played. But if they're not the way I would do it, then I seem to get frustrated about it. Like Lineage, the game from NCSoft that did so well for NCSoft, was incredibly beautiful, inspired by Ultima, incredibly beautiful, tons of fans, way more fans than any Ultima ever had if you look at it globally. And yet when I sit down and play it and I walk over and I go, oh, look, there's a beautiful chest. Oh, look, it's just art. You can't interact with it. I'm like, screw this. I'm not going to play it.
Right, yeah.
Because it's wrong. Because the design is wrong. Because it's not the way I think it ought to be. And so, maybe that's the reason. I don't know why. But no, I like all kinds of games, but rarely games that are directly competitive.
All right. Well, thank you very much again for taking the time to come out. It's been an absolute joy for me. I think if I'm going to close out with anything, I just want to let you know that Ultima has been like one of the single biggest impacts on my life from a video game, or even from pretty much anything. I myself actually walked down the aisle at my wedding to Stones.
Excellent. Fantastic.
My best friend has had the Stones as his ringtone for years. I still have friends who still use it. Just me and my friends and so many people throughout my life have just been completely touched by your work. I just wanted to thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for saying it, and I'll pass that on to YOLO also. YOLO obviously gets credit for Stones, which was one of the greatest things ever in Ultima. So, yeah. Since this is the classic gaming group, I still think the classic games have a lot to tell, even modern players who get a chance to go back and experience them. So, keep on playing, keep on enjoying, and all of us have had a chance to be at this early part of the industry. It'll be exciting to see where this takes us down through the next few decades.
All right. Well, thank you very much. The honor is entirely mine, and thank you once again for joining us.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
And thank you all for joining us. As you may or may not know, the Classic Gamers Guild is on Facebook. We have a page, we have a group. Come join the community and chat classic games with us. You can follow us on Twitter at the CG Guild. You can follow us on Instagram at CGG Podcast. And we have an email if you would like to, if you have any questions or you'd like to interact with the hosts. The email address is mail@classicgamersguild.com. If you'd like to support the show, we have a Patreon as well. Just look up the Classic Gamers Guild. Once again, Paul could not join us today, so I will close this out by saying, don't do murders unless maybe you can find the way to murder Lord British, but I wouldn't really recommend that, but it's fun. See you next time.